So for this afternoon session, we're starting off with our last overseas talk. This one is from San Francisco, and our speaker here is Elizabeth Churchill, who is the director of UI, that's user interface, at the Fuchsia operating system project at Google. So Fuchsia is Google's new open source operating system for targeted at embedded systems. It's a capability-based system, microkernel-based. It has a lot in common with what we do, and it's open source. Elizabeth is sort of not the typical techo. She's got a background in psychology, AI, and cognitive science, and that I guess is a sort of not too far-fetched if you're in charge of user interfaces. She is a member of the ACM CHI Computer Human Interface Academy, a fellow of the ACM and an ACM Distinguished Lecturer. She's also the recent vice president of the ACM and also has won the prestigious Athena Women in Technology Award and listed as one of the top women leaders in the UK, in user experience. Sorry for that. Her talk is about, and I lost my, I lost my program here, and Elizabeth can introduce her talk title herself, I guess. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Unmute. You can hear me now, yes? Okay, I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Can someone tell me that you can hear me? I'm going to assume that you can hear me. All right, well, thank you so much for having me here. All good, excellent. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And what I'm going to talk about today a little bit is user experience for developer experience. And a lot of what I've been doing for the last several years at Google has been thinking about designers and developers and users, and how if we make designer and developer experiences with the tools that they use better, through great research and great design, we can make end user experiences better. And by end user, I mean all of us that use, computers or our mobile devices every day. So that's the sort of context I'm coming from. And so the goals for this talk, which I want to keep fairly informal, and there's going to be quite high level points, but there's a lot of other resources you can follow up and find out more detail, is to ask the question, what can designer or developer experience learn from user experience? User experience being a great field that has emerged in the last 20 plus years, grounded in an academic field of human-computer interaction that has been around since the late 70s and early 1980s. But user experience is really focused, as I mentioned, on the devices that we use every day, devices like these. And really, we've done a lot of work to make consumer experiences great. And I'm going to give you just a couple of little examples from my world. Fuchsia was already mentioned, but Flutter, which is a UI framework, is another one that I work with and where I manage research and design. So I want to go back because I was told that what we're doing here, and I'm very honored to be here for this, is celebrating John Lyons, whose book with source code, which was ahead of its time to talk about a structure and give people examples, made Unix accessible to so many. And some of the other things that were going on at the time when the book was published, Apple, some pretty clunky looking computers. But one of the goals for me personally has always been to make computing and interacting with computational devices much easier for everybody. A big value that I have is trying to make tools better for designers and developers, as well as consumers and everyday users, so that we can really embrace all different ways of building tools for all kinds of people, so accessible in the biggest sense of the word. So that's what sort of drives me and why I'm working in the space I'm working in. And what else was happening in 1976? Well, the Queen Elizabeth, sent her first email, I discovered, as I was researching a little bit for this talk and thinking about the time frame. And I remember the first email I sent, which was on a clunky device. I told my friends I'd sent an email and they thought it stood for Elizabeth Mail. So we're going way back in time, but also a time when I was sort of starting to work during the 80s on a lot of these devices, Unix devices, and doing a lot of work with these very sort of parsimonious interfaces. Anyway, so I just wanted to share a little bit of personal stuff there. So given that background and given all of the excitement that existed around computation and around using computers for work and in the workplace, because we were moving more and more computers into the workplace and the personal computer was arriving, the world of HCI, as I mentioned, human-computer interaction, really started to come about. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about that background. And so, what did things look like? Well, I'm sure we've seen screens like this, all of us. And the screen on the right here, and I have the attribution where I got this from, was the first sort of real sort of attempts to make what was just sort of letters on a screen actually look better, using cognitive psychology and visual perception to think about how you present information and group things in ways spatially with a little bit of depth, a little bit of sort of implying physical artifacts, using metaphors to try and take this very abstract information and turn it into something that was easy for humans to understand. Here you see grouping, you see, as I say, some shadow, you see some stuff that is moving at a different speed, perhaps. So the notion of the graphical user interface, the notion of using human visual perception and cognitive psychology to group information in such a way that it is easily usable or glanceable. You can just quickly look at this and discover what it is you need to know. You might have a lot of expertise, but you know how this thing works. You understand where you're going to find the information you need. And human-computer interaction as a discipline, as a field of endeavor, has always been multidisciplinary, bringing in psychology, computer science, engineering, software engineering, etc., to really start to build tools to allow people to do the things they want to do without spending a lot of time wrangling the tooling that is very, very complicated. And so this tradition has been around for a very long time, and we have a huge research archive of excellent research, experimentation that really can help guide us. And so one of the things that I've spent my career sort of thinking about is how we take those lessons and we don't reinvent repeatedly the lessons that we've learned, but we bring the best to the different situations that we're working in. And I'll give you some examples of that. So here we are. Here's the definition of human-computer interaction. One definition from a great scholar and friend of mine, Alan Dix. And human-computer interaction is a multidisciplinary field of study focusing on the design of computer technology, and in particular, the interaction between humans, the users, and computers. And while initially concerned with computers only, HCI has expanded to cover almost all forms of human technology design. And that vision of not just the screen, but how these technologies fit into our lives and how we get our activities accomplished is a really big one and a really important one. And I'm going to contextualize that in my current world for you, I hope, at least. And so in the modern contemporary situation that we're in, design systems have become a really important field of research and application. So when I said that all of those observations from research, they're available to us, and we've been thinking about human vision and psychology for a very long time, in order to deeply understand how people interact with interfaces. One of the ways that that information has been effectively codified for others who don't have degrees, PhDs, etc., in this area to consume and apply is through design systems. Design systems really emerged about 2011 and have become a mainstay in the design world, especially around consumer applications, like I said, for you and me to use on our favorite devices, whether it's our phones or our tablets or our desktops. And so I spent quite a lot of time working within and setting up research for material design. And that is Google's design system that was launched in 2014 and continues to be used extensively, both internally by Google teams, but also externally. Again, that idea of the open source and the contributing to the bigger world of design. So design systems typically are codified knowledge around the form, the shape, the line, the texture, the color palette, and the space of all of the applications or apps that you have on your various devices. It gives designers and developers a way to not have to reinvent the wheel, but to take these principles and apply them. And with space and motion and movement, like we're seeing, and typography and fonts, and also content strategy, the little labels that are on all of our text fields and so forth. The best practices are laid out in design systems, as well as the engineering components. So if you're a company, you can use these and have consistent designs across a suite of different experiences. You can also reduce a lot of engineering and design time because people aren't, as I said, reinventing the wheel. And so design systems have become increasingly popular for really making efficient, great user experiences. And in material design, these are some of the examples that were prototyped and thought about a few years ago. And the reason I want to show you this is that the brilliant designers did a lot of prototyping of different kinds of interactions that are sort of elemental interactions that you have, and trying them out to see what they would look like. And then my research team would take classical experimental techniques from human-computer interaction and our fields of psychology and test which ones worked better. So I wanted to just show you some of this because I ultimately, and here's some of the color palettes that we have tested and tried out so that you can have consistency of color. I, for one, have no real deep training in color palettes, and so this is very helpful for me. We also have typography, and we've done experiments around the personality of different typographical presentations and fonts. You probably don't want something that's a very playful font on a bank site, for example. So these are things that, you know, we actually really share all of that knowledge to try and help people, designers and developers, create great experiences for the consumer. And so where I'm at right now, which is what I'm going to come to and just give you some examples of how we're applying that kind of approach, is to the developer experience. I want that kind of consumer grade experience and experimentation to be applied to developer tooling. And there are many different kinds of developers and many different kinds of tools, obviously. So a lot of what we're also doing in my team is understanding the different needs of different developer constituencies. And this is a great quote from Brad Myers, who has been working in this area of developer experience for a very long time. Developers are humans, and software development languages and environments are the user interfaces through which developers interact with computers. This means that researchers should use conventional human-computer interaction techniques and methods to investigate how developers use programming languages and tools. And I would add to that, extending the design system, design language kinds of specifications and support for the people who are building the tools for developers is also a really exciting area of work to be in. And that's where I am currently situated. So what does research and design for developer experience look like? Given all of this years of experience we have in human-computer interaction with the expansive ideas of how we can change humans interacting with computational technologies, and more recently, the user experience world of making great consumer experiences for often discretionary interactions. How can we apply that in the developer space in my world? And so there are three areas that my teams are looking at, and I'll give you an example from Flutter, and then I'll talk just a little bit about Fuchsia. The first is in workflows. So understanding the critical user journeys, user here is the developer. What do developers want to do? What are their goals? What do they want to achieve? Understanding how their tools are integrated or not, how all of the development environments sit upon each other and interact with each other, where the dependencies are. Moving towards better tooling and better integration, and reducing cognitive load, reducing the amount of time people have to think about those integrations, so that we can get folks to focus on what they're trying to achieve, the tasks they're wanting to achieve. And we've done some extensive research around, oh, well, when I plug this in, that works, then I have to download that, and then I have to do this. And it's amazing how patient a lot of developers and designers are, because they have become accustomed to doing what I would call workarounds, because there's poor integration as just part of the workflow. So how can we reduce those workarounds? Branding and documentation is another really important area. We really want to be able to explain the intent and goals of what we're doing, whether it's Flutter, UI framework, or Fuchsia, an operating system, sharing the value that people will get in using what we're producing, and providing tested and great documentation, offering code labs, communicating in an omni-channel way, omni-channel being a marketing term for multiple different services that you show up in. So you've got your website, you've got Twitter, and you're responding to people. You're in various different, developer environments or designer environments and responding. So all of the different places people expect to find information, we want to be there with information that is consumable in the right way, the right information, at the right time, in the right place. Classic human-computer interaction principles. And the tooling itself, using standard and modified user experience, consumer user experience techniques to help build better tools for developers and build better interfaces. Debugging tools and error messaging are a great example, and I'll just repeat a little bit about that in a second. So using these great design principles and understanding what principles we can use and reapply. So these are a set of techniques that if you're in user experience or human-computer interaction world that are constantly around A/B tests, surveys, diary studies and experience sampling, ethnographic field studies, going and talking to people about what they really do, remote and in person, but not these days in person, qualitative and quantitative tests, log analysis, usability tests. The ones in green typically are the ones that we use mostly, and a lot of interviews as well. So these are the kinds of ways to actually get to the people and understand what it is they're doing by engaging them, understanding their behaviors, and really trying to get some lessons learned. So setting that framework up, Flutter is Google's UI toolkit for building natively compiled applications for mobile, web, and desktop from a single code base. Flutter is getting increasingly popular, and there are three product pillars. High velocity development is one of them. One of the ways that we get high velocity development is to reduce that friction that I was talking about, where people are having to use multiple tools, poor integration, and trying to find documentation, trying to find the answers to the questions that they have in order to accomplish their tasks. And flexible designs and high quality experiences for end users is also a big goal for Flutter. And that's back to the statement I made earlier, which is great developer and designer tooling gets designers and developers to focus on getting great end user experiences faster, easier, with less friction. So all of our research is really about that. Borrowing from the literature around developer experience, we have 3 pillars of API usability, for example, that we apply in the Flutter context. There's the API design, the tooling, and the documentation, as I mentioned earlier. So in terms of API design, we do a lot of those techniques of observing, watching people in usability tests use our APIs, being very human-centric in the way that we actually interview people. So there are 4 steps. Prepare the API test that you want to test. And it could be an early, not yet released. It could be something very much in beta, and that would be what I would recommend. Specify a representative programming task that can be accomplished using the API. Moderate and observe programmers, developers attempting to accomplish their task, and evaluate the results. And then decide if changes are needed to the tooling or the documentation or the API itself. So this is a very standard kind of technique that is applied to consumer experiences, and we're taking that into this context as most people in the developer experience will do. So preparing the test that you want, make a list of the aspects that you want to cover. If it has not been implemented, use API stubs, as I mentioned, or prototypes. Specify the representative programming task that can be accomplished, and give people a lot of details so it feels very real to them, so they really feel like they're engaged. Because you're really wanting to hear what someone is doing. And then we've done a classic setup, which has been around since the beginning of HCI and UX, where you have a study room, and typically you have somebody sort of doing all of these activities while in the observation room. You don't just have the researchers and designers, but you have your product managers, your engineering partners coming to see how somebody is using what they have created. And then you have to really tell people that this is a test of the API or the product, not of them. And that is really critically important. This is about the test of Flutter in this instance. So if there's anything confusing, don't worry, this is what we need to fix. We ask people to think aloud and do, it's the classic technique, to talk to us about what they're doing so that you can really start to see the problem solving that they're experiencing. And this think aloud protocol is something that has been around in our world, in the human-computer interaction world, or the user experience, developer experience world, for a very, very long time. Because as people are trying to do the thing, they will tell you what they're experiencing. A lot of work in developer experience asks people for surveys, satisfaction surveys, reflective reviews. It's very hard for people to remember. And like I said earlier, typically a lot of people are using workarounds that they're just expecting they have to use. And they're just used to that friction and getting around it, rather than actually having somebody listen to them, go through that, and then as a design person, think, wow, we should fix that. So really being there at the same time. And so here's sort of an example of a sort of setup, and there's a sort of like, I'll just do something first. And in this particular instance, this person goes through trying a lot of things, opening a lot of different windows, going to look for documentation that they can't find. And they think that this is just what they have to do to succeed. We take away the message that no, actually, that behavioral data of what they did is something that tells us we need to do a different design for the tooling, the integration, and the documentation. So the behavioral data is really important, as well as that think aloud, and we're watching the behavioral. The retrospective accounts aren't as useful. And this is where we use another technique that comes typically from user experience in the consumer space. There's a tool that we use called Paco that was built by one of the people in my team. And this is a diary tool that has been used, and an experience sampling tool that has been used, as I say, mostly in the user experience, consumer experience world, that we're bringing into the developer experience world. And what this tool allows us to do is it allows us to have participants who have consented to be part of studies, to either do quick diary studies, so they'll get a little pop-up every now and again based on certain actions they take or on certain times of day, to tell us what they're doing. We also can instrument their activity through a set of tasks and understand how well they're doing with the coding tasks. And so here is an example of a kind of visualization that we use, where somebody is going in and out of different tools. Remember, I talked about tool integration. So there's Google Chrome here, there's a simulator, there's API docs. And so we track over time where people spend their time and how they bounce in and out of different tools, and how they go to look for the resources they need to solve the tasks that we know they're trying to solve. And these visualizations are really interesting, because if you use these and you show them back to the participants themselves, they will start to reflect in a different way about their activities. And one can start to talk to them about frictions and frustrations and workarounds, and what can be fixed and what might make their lives and jobs much easier. So taking that kind of approach, you can look at application switching, and this is like one of the slides from one of the many studies, is that the transitions between tools in a time frame was really high, and transitions from the IDE to the browser looking for information that was not available in our documentation was higher than we had hypothesized or hoped for. So you can see this kind of approach to behavioral tracking and analysis, as well as talking to people about what they're doing, is really helpful. And we've done a number of different studies on this kind of thing. This is just one of the papers that we published recently around the misalignment between expectations that developers have and API usability. And we've also started looking a lot at error messages. And this is a question that Tao has posed, my colleague. Why does a modern IDE present error messages in the same manner as a computer 40 years ago? And so one of the things we've done is bring that design sensibility that my team has to think about color, indentation, typography in error messages for Flutter, and also for Fuchsia. So, API design, tooling, and documentation are key pillars. And coming back to my original, what we're working on, workflows, branding, and documentation, I talked a little bit about tooling and documentation and workflows. But this right content for the right person in the right place in the right time is something that HCI has been talking about for a very long time. And in the Fuchsia context, this operating system, which launched earlier this week, you may have seen some announcements about that. The Fuchsia developer side externally has had incredible amounts of content strategy and documentation work on it already for an initial tiny launch, and we are working all the time now to try and understand how to make the content really accessible to people, so that it's something that people are excited about, even though it's minimal at this point. And so that kind of work of bringing that, explaining complex things to people, even in a small user base like Fuchsia or a larger user base like Flutter, is critically important in my team. And I've mentioned interviews before. So, we do a lot of interviews that are very foundational. My team is doing a lot of not just looking at APIs and specific features and specific functions, but spending a lot of time understanding goals and workflows, and using, again, classic techniques, getting people to put Post-its up, telling us what they do, telling us about their workflows, what are their priorities, what do they really want to achieve. So I'm just zooming out from the features and from the language to what is it you're motivated by? What are you trying to do? And getting people to draw their workflows, to draw how they consider the system working for them or not for them. And this is incredibly rich for helping us in terms of strategy for the whole team, for the Flutter team and the Fuchsia team. Understanding how those different constituencies of designers and developers think about the problem, think about the tools, think about what is working for them and what is not. Because this isn't just fixing something in the moment, it's actually putting structures of collaboration in place over the longer term. Back to that bigger picture of HCI that Alan Dix had in the quote I shared earlier. So we're coming to time. I think I've given you a little bit of a snippet here of understanding how the bigger picture of UX for developer experience, HCI for developer experience, includes understanding what people want to do, understanding the tools down to the little features that are so important, and then understanding how the documentation and the support around what people are doing is all part of the purview, but each single small piece adds up to a great whole, a really important big piece. And if we can take all of that and all of the work that has been done in the consumer space in design systems and extend that into all of the things that we see in design systems for the consumer space, for the developer space, then I'll be really happy to have contributed. So thank you very, very much for your attention. And I want to thank Tao in particular for his help with this work, but my whole team for all of the fantastic work that they've done. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Your talk triggered plenty of questions. So first one, which is a really good one, I think, and that's got upvoted most. How do we motivate people to generate good documentation? It's usually not the most praised job despite its importance after all. And I must add, it's difficult, very hard to actually get people to are able to write good documentation.
I love that question, because one of the reasons that we don't have great documentation is because people don't invest in content strategists, UX writers, and I've heard the word documentarians. So many people are asked to provide documentation as an adjunct or something to their job that they do already. But the reality is, putting investment into hiring someone who is a content strategist or documentarian or a writer is one of the best things that you can do in any team, because they not only know how to write, they know how to extract the right kinds of information from multiple different audiences. So rather than incenting people whose job is not centrally around that, with whatever you want to incent them with, but hiring somebody to come and help you with that is my strongest recommendation. It's made such a difference for me, hiring great content strategists and UX writers.
Thank you. One that I had on my mind as well. Does the, no, what was, oh, sorry, I lost the one. Oh, how will the new material you design system impact Fuchsia? Or put it differently, is there can you give a concrete example on how your studies impacted the API?
Yeah, so I can, and that paper that I suggested is like a set of recommendations, which is around how do we give developers insights into, if they make this choice rather than that choice, there will be different downstream consequences. So we have a set of recommendations around trying to support developers making the right choices. The other place that we've had direct impact is in the errors, how errors are reported and are represented. So we've done a lot of work on error reporting, and we've also done a bunch of research that has impacted the hot reload function in Flutter. But back to the other question around how will we extend material design for more developer tooling? The question is, I don't know, but I'm still in touch with a lot of the material design people who are amazing, and I'm still sort of advising in various ways, and we are looking at how we can extend the material design principles to really apply to the developer space. But that is a work in progress.
Okay. Thus, reducing this friction you referred to in the context of Flutter necessarily reduce flexibility and creativity due to the power of the default.
To the power of the which?
The default.
The default. I hope so. I don't have data on that yet, but I hope so. I mean, I think reducing friction, there's a couple of ways of when you reduce friction. You basically free up a lot of developer time, and you get people who are less frustrated. And so I don't have any measures or metrics I can share with you right now, but I do have, we do have data in the Flutter context of increased satisfaction of users when we have released certain changes that have been based in research. So we see satisfaction going up in our surveys, but I don't have metrics specifically on reducing the frictions. We haven't measured that yet.
Okay. So do you think there are any further developments for HCI in command line interface? And if, what will it be like?
I do think there are further developments. I'm going to use error messages and so forth in, as an example. In the use of, using color, using indentation, and using better feedback for whatever you're doing, I think it really improves how people scan what they're doing, and they look back at, logs and so forth in different ways. So I do think there's a lot of work in that space, which is why I'm here, trying to figure out what that space is. So if people have ideas, please share with me. And if you want some more concrete examples, you can write to me and I'll send them.
And there's one that sort of relates to our specific topic today. Does Fuchsia developer UX take any inspiration from the Unix tradition of composition of simple tools? I
don't know. I mean, I don't really know how to answer that, to be honest. I'm not immersed enough in the history to know. Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I will go and research that.
Do you worry that optimizing for readability, usability can create lifeless websites that all start look the same?
Do I worry? No. If all of those things make it easier for the humans, no. So here's the only place in which I think all things looking the same could be bad, and this is not the space I work in. That is when you have a brand and everyone thinks that your brand is everywhere and the performance isn't particularly good. I'll give you a concrete example. When material design was released, a lot of people used material design and everything looked the same, and everybody thought it was a Google product, but some of the products weren't the best necessarily. And so if you have great usability and readability and everything is the same and it's great usability and readability, then I'm like, consistency seems pretty good to me.
Okay.
I'm on the side of the humans, what can I tell you?
So I left the elephant in the room for last. What will be the role of Fuchsia in the future, and how will it coexist with Android?
Oh, it'll absolutely coexist with Android, no question. And the role of Fuchsia in the future is in part about how Fuchsia is understood and taken up, and it's open source, and how people interact and give us feedback. There's a very strong partnership within Google between all of the different teams, and certainly with Android. So, I think what we want is the best of Fuchsia, the best of Android, the best of everything. And so partly check out Fuchsia and, contribute and come and share your thoughts with us, because it's just a small launch, just trying something out and open to ideas in a very humble way. So that's an invitation for folks to go and check out and share with us.
All right. Then thank you very much for your time, for giving a sort of different kind of talk, but no less relevant, obviously, and no less interesting. And thanks for staying up late for us as well, and generally contributing to our John Lyons Distinguished Lectures here. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very honored to be here. And please, folks, follow up with questions. All right.